Welcome to our second talk. We begin with ritual. Naomi Rachel Remen uses this ritual every morning. She learned this from a Tibetan elderly nun. You take water from a stream or tap, and you put it into a designated cup. You fill it with your portion of the day, all that will come to you this day. Your relations, your work, your dreams, your doubts, your garden, your worries, your conflicts, all the things that will happen to you that you don't yet know. Fill it all the way to the brim so that you have the fullness of your day. As your cup fills up, receive every drop open-heartedly, unconditionally. This is your portion this day. Then, carefully, so it won't spill, take it to its special place for you. Mine is at my desk. And then begin your day. And now we begin our talk. Welcome to our second talk of how to help people die and therefore how do we live. So we learned some lessons from the dying, some things of be genuine, just connect, allow things to surface, help them find out what the meaning is, leaning into it, and praying. And this time, we're going to have a bowl, a frame of which to put around it. And a bowl doesn't quite fit because I want to offer my understanding of a coherent way that we might look at all these things. So this time, we will begin with the Jewish understanding of covenant. We will move from covenant through Jesus to Freud's understanding of repression and transference. And then we'll talk about Taoism to give a different perspective. We'll give you some stories so that you can have some understanding of how these fit with different people. And then we'll say, what does this mean for our lives? So let's begin with covenant. Now we're going to talk about covenant, but before covenant, I want to talk about a sense of God prior to Abraham and Sarah. I think that God, for many peoples, was something to be feared. About 3000 BC, there were comets that were coming across the sky, and in fact, one comet that perhaps even landed on the earth, and it terrified every people. The Irish people who had worshipped things under the earth began to worship and fear the sky and used to have fires, like the fire in the sky, that would imitate and yet ward off this presence of this terrifying comet that came over. The Maya, about that exact same time, started their calendar at 3114 BC. And since that time, they would have 3 stones that would be in every Maya household's place to have a fire. I think that means that something terrifying happened on the earth. And I think that's what they perceived God to be, as coming from the heavens and being terrifying. So then comes Abraham and Sarah. And their names, of course, were Abram and Sarai. You know that. And God came to them and said, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, walk with me. I will make a covenant between us. I will establish a covenant as an everlasting promise between me and you and your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan I will give you as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants. And as for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants for generations to come. Now, there are several, like 3 or 4 renditions of what this covenant meant and what the stipulations of what the people were to do. But most of all, they were supposed to hear the covenant and hear God, and hearing meant to obey. Hearing meant not just you hear with your ears, but hear means that you follow and you do. kind of like a most wonderful piece of music that you've ever heard, and it just fills you up and you have to respond to it. It's that sense of covenant. So Abram, who bowed down on the ground and agreed to this covenant, got his name changed from Abram to Abraham, and Sarah got her name changed from Sarai to Sarah with an H. This H is the same H that God's name is referred to as Yahweh, YHWH. And H is the effortless vowel, consonant that you make with your voice without moving your lips at all. It indicates that God created the world effortlessly. And then Sarah and Abraham were part of receiving this effortless grace. Now, we know that Abraham was challenged to sacrifice Isaac. And he goes all the way up, and he gets the sticks and takes Isaac up there. And Isaac, there's no sheep here. Why are we doing this? And then it seems like at that point God relented. I don't think God relented. I think that people were so used to offering sacrifice to appease God, and God said, I just want you to hear. I just want you to be obedient. I don't want you to sacrifice, but I want you to obey as closely as you can, almost like sacrificing. I think Yahweh at this time wanted relationship, not sacrifice. And that's why the story of Isaac comes out the way it does. Eventually, the people, through prophets and judges and priests, came to the land of Canaan. We know it took a long time to get there, but then they got there and they prospered, and they had David and wise Solomon, and life was the promised land. And Walt Brueggemann says from Eden Seminary, the land, the land, the land. The land is what's important to the people, and God promised the land of milk and honey, a place of prosperity, along with many descendants. So everything's great, and then what happens? 587 BC. Now, I didn't remember what 587 BC was, but people then knew exactly what it was, because there was a war with Babylon. Babylon won, and they were carried over. They were refugees. They were taken captives over to Babylon and stayed there. And we know songs from that. During that time, one of the rabbis, named the Deuteronomist to us, was so livid and so upset and so angry, and he wanted to know why God did this. And not just why, because he wanted to know when exactly was the point when God abandoned them. So he looked through the scrolls of Scripture, and he put one down, and then another down, and another down, and another down, and he thought that he could find a place where God abandoned them. But as it turned out, every scroll lined up line for line. At every age, God sent a prophet or a judge, Moses, at every place. And then he realized God hadn't abandoned them. And then he looked and he read and he saw that at every place and every turn, the people had abandoned God. He was crestfallen. He couldn't believe it. He set out to prove God and accuse God, and it turned around and he accused himself. He was beset with grief, because not only had he lost the land, but he had lost the covenant with God. In the middle of his grief, he repented and said, "Oh God, I'm so sorry for what we did." And in that moment of his heart feeling so upset and so repentant, he heard this. He heard something like, "I will set up an everlasting covenant to you, and I will give it to you and your descendants, that you may have life. So turn from evil, and choose life." And all of a sudden he realized that in the middle of being in captivity, these words came down to him. And the Deuteronomist woke up just fully alive, and he wrote down, and the Hebrew word for, we call the book of Deuteronomy, which means the copy, he wrote down what is called the word. In other words, he wrote down plainly and clearly what it is that the people were to understand. And this is what he understood. Behold, this day I set before you a blessing and a curse. You shall therefore keep all the commandments that I command you this day, that you may be strong. It is not to our fathers and mothers that the Lord gives this, but all here. Choose this day life, that you and your people may live. In the book of Deuteronomy, the word this day is recorded 60 times. He is so full of the understanding that the covenant transcends the land, and that the covenant is now the land that the people stand on. And he just was so full of it. And in fact, many scholars think that the entire Bible was either written or rewritten in this time of Deuteronomy, the time that had been their biggest crisis. And then they went back and built a second temple, and all was fine. I want to move then to Jesus just a little bit. Jesus, a later Jew, again, was at the wedding feast. You know the story of the wedding feast of Cana. And they noted that the wine had run out. And his mother said, Jesus, the wine has run out. And Jesus said, not my time yet. And something happened, because then she said, do whatever he tells you. So he takes the wine, he takes the water, and he changes it into wine. And what this means for us is, first of all, that Jesus was capable of changing something, a covenant that had dried up and was no longer helpful, into something new and alive. And then we know it was in fact the best. They had saved the best of the covenant for last. In other words, the covenant that had come through this whole thing of 587 came here and was now the fullest it could be. The other thing to note here is Jesus said, this is not my time. And so what this means is that when Mary, a human being, said, do whatever he tells you, it means that Jesus and God bends their time to fit our need and our time. And it's not a need, a dire need of fix my leg. It's a need of bounty and fullness and fun and aliveness. So, again, we are told that Jesus brings the bounty of the covenant. And then we also know that Jesus healed the sick. He said, I give you a new command. And what is it besides all the other old commands? What is it? It's love one another and love God like you love one another. And then Jesus said, and there's of course many more things that Jesus did, but Jesus said, do you know why I heal? Now, if you think about it, of all the things that have come before, he says, I want you to know that I heal so that I can forgive sins. In other words, this is totally in line with the covenant, that God comes to people where they are when they repent. The fullness of the covenant, the fullness of life is there. So next, now we went from Abraham and Sarah through 587 and the Deuteronomist to Jesus, a later Jew, and now we're going to go to a much later Jewish person, Freud. Freud was steeped in all of this tradition, and he wanted to understand how to heal people. He knew that children had a trauma and that they brought it all the way to the present moment, and he wanted to know how to heal them. And he tried several things, and then he came to the talking cure, which is the kind of therapy I've been doing much of my life. And what he noted is that people had repressed these childhood memories, and they repressed them, and then they behaved in what he called an erotic way. I would reframe that and say that people repressed what happened to them, and then while they did repress it, they looked through the lens, through the glasses of what happened at everything that was going on. Now, first of all, I want to say that repression, like Ira Byrok's denial, is a good thing. Because if we don't repress things that we can't hold yet, they break us open and split us apart. So we need the repression until the time when we're ready to face it. So what happens in therapy is that since the lens, the glasses through which we see things, when somebody's in therapy and the two people agree to work on understanding and healing what's going on, the person is told to say what comes to mind. And that frees up the control of the ego, just frees it up so that you can just try to be there without that control. And so the person gradually learns this or learns it right away. And then they say something like, well, my friend was telling me directions, but I don't think they gave them all to me and I got lost. And then later on in the conversation, they say, I bought something with cash and I wasn't given the right change. And then someone says, my brother was listening to me, but I don't think he was really listening. And then the therapist says, I wonder if you feel like I'm not going to really listen to you, that I won't do right by you. And the person says, yeah, I do. Now, as I understand Freud, he would call this transference. He would take those outside incidents and transfer them into the room. But I don't think that's the way it is. I think from these glasses, the person saw those three incidents and also sees them in the room, but they're not ready to talk about it because it's frightening to bring it into the present time, into the present person. It's a scary thing. But if you're open and ready for it, you can talk about, I wonder if you think that you're in therapy here and that I'm doing this as a therapist, that you won't listen to me, and the conversation happens. That, to me, first of all, the way that you hear those incidents is you have to listen from your heart to hear these things that are happening. And usually you need to have them happen 3 times because that kind of means that they're ready. That's just a rule that's usually used. But then when you say that, what happens is that what they saw out there is the same as what is in here, because all of it is the lens through which you've seen things because you saw them all along. And once the soul feels like it's been heard a little tiny bit, the soul starts talking more and more. It's just more easy to hear. And you go back a little bit, and you go back a little bit, and you go back a little bit, and the soul says, boy, they're really listening to me. And the soul, hopefully, can go all the way back to the original brokenness, the original offense. And when they do, they're freed up, and they're freed to see life. The glasses come off, and they see everything more clearly as it really is. And besides that, a piece of their soul that had gotten broken off as protection is able to come back so that they live a more coherent life. And then it's a sense that you can be your whole self. And Freud, I believe, had this sense of the brokenness coming all the way into the present time, and the covenant being able to greet you with full life because he was Jewish. And in his bones, he understood the covenant. And therefore, he realized what I think we didn't quite realize before this time is that brokenness comes all the way up, and so does covenant. So next, since this is one perspective, Judeo-Christian, I want to turn to a whole different perspective, the Taoist perspective, just to look like at another part of the world. So, some of you know this, is that in Tao there is a vast sea of potential that's going, and it turns into the heavens and the earth, 1 and 2, and 3, the mediator between them, and then 10,000 things. And there is a chi that shines from heaven to the earth. Now, what is the human part of that? Humans are to be the mediators between heaven and earth. And it is though there is a contract between us from heaven and earth about what humans are supposed to be. And it's described, at least I've learned it from Lonnie Jarrett, is that there is a bone that is broken. Only the first part, the largest part of the bone is in heaven, and the smaller part is with us. And that contract is to know, to live out, not just know, but to live out our destiny of who we're meant to be. And in that, we are asked to become our truer and truer selves. But not this true self, false self, because I believe it evolves, is that the more we're true, the more we become true, the more we become true. So we are the tree between heaven and earth, grounded in the earth, and reaching up toward that chi, sun, sky vibration in the heavens. And you know, in fact, there's some qigong that helps us move from the earth, the energy from the earth, to our hearts and our solar plexus, and also there's bringing down the heaven to us, and that helps us move our energy. Now, when we're this tree, you and I are not the only trees. It's also, everybody is called to this, farmers and city dwellers, suburbans and the homeless, indigenous, descendants of those enslaved, Palestinians and Israelis, Ukrainians and Russians, Republicans and Democrats, the broken and the secure. We are all called to be the tree to live out this contract. And in fact, it's not just the humans that are the trees, it is the animals that are called to live out their contract, and the plants, but they do it naturally. And we somehow have gotten off track. We've lost our original nature. And how do we lose our original nature? Sometimes an incident has happened early on in our lives that break us. You've heard that from Freud. Other times, the way we lose our original nature is that we use our head over our heart. Use that. How am I going to do this? How am I going to control this? Rather than moving from the heart. The other way is that when we're not genuine, we're not really ourselves, we need to put some kind of pretense on us. And it can be that we need to control everything. It also can be that we see ourselves as little or small and not capable of doing things. It also can be staying in relationships that keep us stuck. They're not good for us. And yet we're afraid to move on, do something else. And the other way is that we don't see life giving us like this cup. We don't see life as continual invitations to what's going on. We don't see when we come across a problem or somebody that bothers us or something that's not working out, we don't see it as an invitation to how can we use this to bring about our greater life. So all of that brings us to not living in connection with our destiny, not participating in the flow, being off track, so that we can't get this flow from heaven through the earth. So what's our task? How do we get back on? It is to lean into life. It is when you are doing a work and you really like it, lean into it. Let it be your passion. It is listening to your heart and following your heart, letting it break through the need to control or the need to feel small or whatever, or the need to joke around or whatever those things are. So that we align ourselves with the original flow and the original blessing, because our heart really resides in heaven. That's what they believe. And it feels like it fits for me too. And in times of adversity, what do? You bring your truest self to bear on it. You do what feels the most right from your heart. You don't match it. You don't try to get better than it. You move from your highest self so far and greet the adversity with whatever comes. If somebody's arguing with you, if you lose your job, somebody's not getting along with you, you use your fullest self in response. So when we do that, our eyes shine like stars because we're living out our destiny just as we are meant to do. And that's one of the main ways to look at Taoism. Hey. That one's down.
Just gonna let it run so
I got it.
Ready to go now.
All right.
Let me know.
Here we go. So,
Oh, okay. Sorry. Make sure I'm in place and
not tripping over anything.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Set. 3.
Can I look at you sometimes or no?
I wouldn't.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
that'll
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. 3, 2.
So now, with this covenant perspective and the Taoist perspective, and they do seem similar, don't they? It's amazing how similar they are. I'd like to give you some stories that bring this home. And they're not stories about psychoanalytic psychotherapy because that's private, but I'd like to give you some stories about people and how they turn back to the covenant, or how they find that they're off track and they get more on track of nourishing their destiny, or how in nourishing their destiny they reach something that's a problem and they use it to be even more in tune with their destiny. First of all, we're going to talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I have learned so much from her, and I use her as actually my main guide about how to help people die. So we know that she was following her passion about how to help children die, and she just has wonderful stories about all of that. And so she started giving lectures. She'd been giving lectures for a long time. And one time, this man asked some kind of a question or did something, and he came across as so stingy. And after the lecture, she was just like, oh my gosh, it just got to the core of her for some reason, and it really bothered her. So she called up a really good friend of hers. She called up a really good friend of hers and said, we need to talk. So they met, and Elizabeth talked about how this man really, really bothered her. And in talking about his stinginess, she realized that it reminded her of her father when she was a child. She was a triplet. There was a lap for the first one, there was a lap for the second one, and there was no lap for her. She was left out. Of the 3, she was always left out. And how hard this was for her to bear. And then she had this pet rabbit. So if I don't have them, at least I have my pet rabbit. And what happened? What did her father do? Her father killed the pet rabbit and made it for dinner. And when she realized all of that, she realized how hard her childhood was being left out. She sobbed and sobbed for hours. And then she came to herself and she said, I'm glad this happened to me. It has helped me to have such compassion for so many people. It's helped me to become who I am. So, the incident, the breaking it open and experiencing the original insult, and then being able to move on and affirm herself. She's kind of like in line, and then even more in line. So she shows us how some incidents in our lives help us to become our truer and truer selves. The next one is completely different. It's Jacob, the swindler, back from the patriarchs. Now, I don't know if you remember, but Jacob was a swindler. He was the one with his mother who put on the hairy arms so that his father, who was blind.
That's going to be a problem. Do you want to just take it from that last?
Jacob. Okay. Taking it from Jacob. So the next one I want to talk about is Jacob, the swindler. You remember him from the patriarchs. I think you remember the story that he and his mother helped him to put on hairy arms so that his blind father would not give the promise given to the eldest son, the handing of the covenant promise to Esau. He ended up giving it to Jacob. So Jacob held the promise. And he even had a dream, because he had the promise, of seeing a ladder or some kind of transference between heaven and earth coming down. But did that change Jacob? No way. Then he had his uncle Laban, and he said to Laban, well, they needed to split up the sheep, and he said to Laban, how about if you get these colored sheep and I get those colored sheep? And Laban said, okay, and it turned out that Laban had about 1/4 of the sheep because they were that color, and Jacob got 3/4 of the sheep, still figuring out how to swindle. Well, he had to get away from Laban, and he decided to go back home where there was Esau. And he thought, has Esau forgotten what happened, or has he forgiven me? Here comes Esau with 400 men. And Jacob thinks, this is it. I can't get away from this. And he said, I'm sorry for what happened. I have not done my right portion of life. And then what happened, I think he was sleeping, and there was an angel, an angel, who came and started wrestling with him. And he was wrestling, and the angel broke Jacob's hip. And Jacob said, I will not go until you bless me. So they kept wrestling, and then the angel blessed him. And from then on, Jacob's name, which means swindler, got changed to the name Israel, which means one who grappled with God. He rightly grappled. And from then on, he had descendants. You know, the 12 tribes of Israel. He had abundance. He was the leader, the father of many generations and descendants. But he always walked with a limp. The next one we're going to go to is one of my favorites, Mary and Martha. So, I don't know if you remember this story, but Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, taking in all of his lessons and what he was learning. And Martha was serving the tables and doing this and cleaning up. And she finally said to Jesus, wanting to get Mary in trouble, would you please tell her to stop, listening to you and start helping out here? And Jesus said, you are troubled about many things. Mary has chosen the right part. And then we don't know what happened. We know continually how the church has interpreted this is that there are two ways to serve, Mary and Martha, but this totally misses the point. Do we know what happened to Martha afterward? Yes, we do. What happened when Jesus went to Lazarus who died? Who came to greet him? Which you're not supposed to do if you're a woman. Martha. And what does Martha say? If you weren't here, Lazarus would not have died. What incredible faith she showed. That faith indicates that she had sat at Jesus' feet for a long time to understand that truth about who Jesus was. And then Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, they shall live. And Jesus says to Martha, do you believe this? And Martha says, yes, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God. This is the first time that anybody has recognized Jesus for who he really is. The first time comes from Martha, a woman. And she proclaimed this not only to Jesus, but all of us who read this story in the Bible over and over again. So now we're at the part where we go, well, what does this mean for us? Have you been thinking about what this means for you, all these things that have been said? So one of the things, or some of the things that we can say is, we are all broken. And we keep repeating our brokenness until we slow down and are willing to look and recognize it. Sometimes we need that help from another person. Sometimes it comes to us. But we are meant to slow down and see the brokenness, the lens through which we see the world, so that we can let go of it, repent, turn toward life, and live life out. And we're meant to live life down to our toes, not just our purpose of life, but fun, silliness, dancing, music, whatever is creative in us. So how do we do this? The same way as we talked about earlier about how we help people die. Be genuine. Grace can only come to you. It can't come to somebody you think you are. It can't come to Bonhoeffer or Merton or Bayrock. It has to come to you, how you are, with your foibles and your stuff and your graces and your goodnesses. The covenant comes, and life comes to you. The second one is just connect. Connect with other people, because we are meant to be in connection. And connect what is meaningful in your life. Connect those points in your life that meant a lot, because they will help you to see where you are and also help you to see where you're going. And connect with that which is greater than you. The oneness, the ocean, the forest, your partner, your child, God. Connect with whatever feels like it is life with you, and let that life with you take you to fuller places. Be the tree that connects heaven and earth. Be that one that stands and lets the heavens and the chi come down into the earth and be rooted there. Be the one that receives all of that and expresses that in the earth. And realize that you're doing that with other trees, real trees, animals, plants. When you come across trouble, lean into it. Wonder what it's there for you, how it's meant for you to grow. Forgive others. Don't hold on to them and say, it's your fault. Let them be and use it for how you're meant to grow. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says again, don't ask from others what you need. Don't rely on others. Rely on that still, quiet voice in your heart. Let it speak to you. Let it lead you. Let it tell you what to do. She did this with children who were dying, who could verbalize what they needed and how they needed to live until they let go. And then ask for help in doing it your way, with friends or therapists, asking earnestly for what you need. Elizabeth again says, if you ask for what you need, you will get it in some form. You will. And then I want to remind you that in the first talk we talked about Anthony Williams, whose dog was drowning, and The voice said, don't keep going because you'll drown. And Anthony said, if I can't have my dog, I'm not doing this job. And it seemed as though God changed God's mind. But I want to say that God didn't change God's mind. God, as we've known through the whole covenant, keeps on bending toward us. And when we repent, he keeps changing to greet us with covenant when we are ready and open to have it. So God continually grows according to how we grow and according to where we get stuck. God wants to be there when we get stuck, so when we're ready and we ask for it, we'll get in line again. And the other thing is, a reminder, is that God doesn't do things in God's time. God does things in our time. Just like Mary at the wedding feast, when Jesus said, it's not my time, Mary was like, we need this now. And so God changed timing to come to Mary's time. All the more, those birds have not come today.
They were all over it the last time.
I know, they're not there today at all.
I remember there's a couple cardinals out there.
Yeah, we put out stuff and I don't know.
All right, and whenever you're set, ready? 3, 2.
So, our concluding thoughts, my concluding thoughts are, what does this do? And I just want to say I am so thankful to the Deuteronomist who started off accusing God, lividly accusing God, and followed it all the way through to finding out that God, in fact, had not abandoned him, that he and they had abandoned God. Then he repented, and then he found the covenant waiting for him. Now, all these thoughts that I've given you don't matter. What matters is what they've stirred up in you. What comes to your heart from what I've said. Because it doesn't matter how I interpret it. That's for me to live. It matters how you interpret this and what it stirs up for you to live. What is the context that you hold things in? And how do you hold them? For I want to say this to you, and this is one of my favorite quotes of all the Bible. Surely this command that I am commanding you, and this is from the Deuteronomist, surely this command that I am commanded you this day is not too hard for you, nor is it too far away. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who will go up to the heaven and get this for us, that we may hear and observe it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will cross to the other side and get it for us, that we may hear and observe it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart that you can do it. So, thank you for listening. I hope it stirs up good things for you. And we're going to end with the finishing of the ritual that we began with. And so, we finish this talk the way we began, with ritual. We take the water that has been ours, that we received as a gift, wholeheartedly, unconditionally, and we use it to feed the world. Naomi Rachel Remen takes it outside and pours it on the ground, but we're not there outside. So I'm going to use it to nourish the world.